and welcome to the Masters Tips and Tricks, a Masters Conference series. The Masters Tips and Tricks is a series of recordings of discussions providing practical advice and knowledge from subject matter experts within the legal community. We will be getting started with today's chat in just a moment, but before we begin, just a few program details. My name is Kevin Clark, and I am head of the Litigation Support Department at Thompson Knight, and I will be hosting today's Tips and Tricks discussion. Joining me today is Steve Davis from Digital Discovery in Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Kevin. Always good to be with you, even when it's remote, which is probably apropos given the topic today.
Yes, very true, very true. So today's discussion is on remote collections. And I'm often asked questions such as, when should I request a remote collection over an on-site collection? What does the remote collection process look like? Is it defensible? So there's a lot of interest and a lot of concern over remote collections. So I'm glad that you could join me today on Tips and Tricks and we could discuss remote collections.
Absolutely.
My first question for you: what are some initial questions to ask when considering performing a collection of data from a custodian?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get a little too far down the road before we assess kind of where we're going. I always make the joke about my kids asking us how long is it going to be before we get there, and I always ask them, where are we going first? So when I hear about things, and I think back over the years when people would call and say, hey, I've got 5 gigs of data, or I've got 10 gigs of data, and I'm always like, well, do you? I mean, maybe you do and maybe you don't. So I think the first thing to understand is really, what's the case about? And not just what the case is about from kind of a 30,000 foot view, but also what are the risks at hand in terms of both reputation and cost. There's times to use a sledgehammer and there's kind of times to use a chisel in terms of approach. And that's kind of the continuum from doing a self-collect or an assisted collection with a custodian, or whether you want to do a full bit-by-bit forensic image of all the items in play.
So it seems like data is clearly the focus here. What other considerations need to be taken into account as you make this decision?
Yeah, I think the first thing we look at when we assess situations is what we call Where's Waldo, the kids' book. Kids all loved that when they were little. And we want to know, where is the data reside? The two terms that come to my mind are residency and redundancy. So residency is, what data sources are there? Devices in play? Are there items that are in repositories or the cloud? Are there is there data that's relevant that's on mobile devices? Could it be in collaboration sites like Slack? So we want to know where items might be resident. And then secondarily, we want to know, are there redundant locations? Because there may be data on a mobile device, but there may also be data that's synced to a cloud or to an individual computer. So once you start looking at what devices are in play, and along with that, what custodians are in play or people of interest, and then what time frame are we looking to collect data from, can you start to make decisions about the right way to approach collections, be they independent, self-directed collections, be they assisted collections, feet on the street where you have to go to a location and capture data, or whether you can do things remotely utilizing remote technology like encrypted hard drives that are sent to people, or actually collecting directly from the cloud and landing data behind the firewall back into the e-discovery or forensic shops environment.
Okay, you just mentioned several different methods of collections. What are the common methods for ESI collection utilized today?
Yeah, a lot of times you'll have people say, I took my 20 documents and I folderized them or copied them to my desktop. And that's a self-directed or a custodian-directed collection. It's probably the weakest way to do things because you run risk about methodology, defensibility, the fact that the cook in the kitchen is kind of making their own recipe and making decisions on what's relevant and what isn't. So it's not necessarily a great way to do things, but that may be appropriate given the case. If it's a case that's a contractual case and there's really no dispute over the form of the contract, and it's really more a factual argument, then that may be appropriate. as you get into having items that you need to be more forensically defensible or secure about, then you start to go along that continuum where you can utilize a rack kit, where you send people an encrypted device. You still steer the device or the car in terms of doing the collection because a forensic analyst is doing it remotely. We just take control of the keyboard from the custodian once they receive that kit and plug it in via USB. Or you can actually go there and have feet on the street, as we say, and interact directly with the device. But there's really limited difference between the last two methodologies. They're both utilizing forensic toolkit. So they're using all the famous ones that you hear about all the time, like the Celebrites and the FTKs and the Incase and the Axiom and Blacklight and all the companies that provide those tools. And so if you're doing that, that's probably towards the AA plus area in terms of methodology. But there's also ramifications and implications in terms of making those choices from both logistics and cost standpoint.
And how does a remote forensic collection work? You just mentioned a rack kit, there's cloud-based. Can you walk us through some of the different options, the process of the options?
Sure. So let's talk about cloud-based first. Cloud-based would be things like Office 365. Back in the day, everyone had an Exchange server on their premises on-prem. So 2003 and 2007, and they actually were physical boxes either located on a site or in a co-location center that people were tapping into. That's really moved away. We've moved towards more and more remote access of email and documents. So now we're seeing things that are hosted still on co-location centers. There's still drives and servers that exist, but now they're handled by Google and Amazon and various people. And Office 365 is a great example of that. So G Suite, Office 365, Slack from a collaboration standpoint, these are all different platforms that allow you to do just remote connectivity via the internet and allow you to download data directly from those environments into your lab behind the firewall by getting the appropriate credentials and authorization to do so. So when you talk about cloud, there's no need to provide any destination drive because the destination drive you're copying to is actually in your lab. When you think about remote kits, remote assisted collection kit is something that we kind of trademarked and is proprietary to our organization. This is something where you send out an encrypted drive to a location to get a server or to get an individual computer device or a tablet or a phone, and it allows you to write the data directly to that destination drive, which is connected via USB. So now you're not having to stream data over the bandwidth of the internet. Rather, you're able to write it directly to that destination drive. And that's very appropriate when you're trying to do full images. A lot of companies have sold this notion of being able to stream images, international companies, over their network or intranet as such. And the reality is there's a lot of faults with that, and a lot of problems with that. So this theory of sending out an encrypted drive, having us attach via like a team viewer, taking control of the keyboard, and then actually doing the same operation of forensic imaging as we would do in person is really a valuable one, and there's a lot of benefits to it.
And what additional factors need to be taken into consideration when thinking about remote collection?
Well, I think you need to know whether you have a disparate amount of people that are located in different areas, number of custodians, number of devices in play, cooperation to get it done. This is not a new concept. This is something that really over the last several years has become kind of the soup du jour of forensic collections. Obviously, with the COVID disaster, we've now seen it being utilized more and more often, but it's not new. This is something we've been doing now for several years because the workforce has become more remote. Data has become more remote. And the locations where devices are no longer necessarily on your desktop. A lot of times those are just appliances that then connect to a mothership in terms of an environment like an Amazon. So we're seeing that you need to identify where data is there cooperation in terms of get access to it, and also are these items or matters that allow you to just get a forensic image of the computer itself or the device itself. For certain cases, some involved with like terrorism, ransomware, or phishing attacks, where you also need to be cognizant of the value of live memory data. Live memory data is something we need to do in person. It's not something we do remotely. It's a different collection methodology. So we, in those cases, would prefer to be on site to do our collections. So just if you ferret out some of the background about what you're up against and whether or not it is a cooperative environment and whether or not you can get certain things like Androids are much more difficult to collect remotely in toto than an iPhone is. An iPhone utilizes basic backup technology of iTunes, which allows you to do it remotely, whereas Androids fall short in that area because they don't have a normalized backup. So you can get certain items from an Android, but it's not the same as it would be with an iPhone. So you need to have people that are educated and understand the nuances and the differences, because I see a lot of publicity and blogs talking about what you can and can't do. And when I start to underwrite them and ask critical questions of them, I find that they kind of don't live up to the test and kind of don't pass a smell test that we apply to forensic collections.
Thanks, Steve. Now, another important question that I often get is about cost. What are the cost implications of doing a remote collection versus maybe an on-site collection?
Yeah, I think we were all surprised by this when we first started doing more and more remote collections. We really didn't think about the fact that, when we sent analysts out into the field to do a collection, you're making decisions on airplane prices and hotels that you stay at and rent-a-cars and per diems, not to mention that you have analysts in the field for 3, 6, 12, 24 hours doing a phone collection or even collecting 5 computers. And so when we started to actually do the tabulations and do the financial analysis of what we were up against, we were finding that remote collections were actually somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% cheaper. And it's also kind of born a new pricing methodology. I see that more and more forensic shops are now going to flat rate or a la carte pricing as it relates to collections of devices, data sources, platforms, servers, and the like, and getting away from an hourly charge. I think that's the dirty little secret in forensics, is kind of the hourly charge, where you sit there for 5 hours watching an iPhone collect and someone wants to charge you $1,500 because the guy sat there for 5 hours. When the reality is, it's much like Gertrude Stein said about a rose is a rose is a rose, a phone is a phone is a phone. And they should be 500 or 700 or whatever the number is that people charge you to get a forensic image or a logical or physical extraction from a phone. It shouldn't really matter whether it's 30 or 60 or 90 minutes, not like you're getting tired watching the process. So we've seen that remote collections allow us to multitask in the lab and work on multiple things at the same time, and not nickel and dime clients charging hourly rates.
Okay, so if you're talking about a phone collection, do you prefer then maybe a flat rate type of model over the hourly?
Yeah, I would say that really for any collection that we do, regardless of source, it really should be done on a flat rate basis. The only caveat to that would be the things that are done after we've collected the data. So things like investigations. When we're doing a USB analysis or an exfiltration investigation, looking to see whether someone may have pilfered or stolen intellectual property from a company, and we're having to look at whether there was 1 USB connected or 35 USBs connected, then there's a linear approach where it makes sense to apply hourly charges to. But I've never really understood why, when you're collecting a phone or a computer or an O365 account or a G Suite platform, why people should be charging hourly rates for it. Rather, an a la carte or flat rate seems to make way more sense. And this spills over into the whole e-discovery argument about how they used to pour the data into the funnel. And I used to always joke about how the gnomes don't get tired, pouring in 200 gig versus 100 gig. The reality is a machine doesn't get tired. It runs overnight. And people that have come up with more flat rate approaches to pricing, I think, are doing a real service to the litigation environment and to the whole e-discovery and forensic areas that we work in when we start to apply intelligent ideas to pricing methodologies, as well as how we actually enact the collection and processing.
Those are some good points, and it makes sense. So One of the biggest items that I get questions about, and I think we should cover here, is about the defensibility and the process of the collection. Basically, I get questions. Is the process forensically sound? Is the process defensible? And how do you answer those
Yeah.
type of questions?
I think the two issues that come to mind are one, who's doing the collection, and then two, how are they doing the collection? So number one is, like in the state of Texas, you're bound to be a private investigator by law in order to perform forensics and bring items to court. So the first thing to look at is who's doing the work. Like we said earlier, self-directed custodian collections are the worst for a lot of reasons. We could have an entire interview or seminar dealing with that. But private investigators and forensic professionals are schooled on how to perform in an independent, objective way a collection that's not bent one way or the other for whatever reason. So I think you want to have defensible, independent collections done, and that's why we exist. That's why people hire forensic outfits like ours. Then secondarily, what toolkit are they using? Like trying to just drag and drop or ghost something or clone something oftentimes leads to problems with metadata manipulation, modification, or spoliation. Sometimes people have very good intentions, but don't really know where data lives. I know one of my daughters struggles with, when I asked her, copy this data, she said, well, I don't know where it is. And I said, well, is it in your documents? But the reality is it's really in her downloads or on her desktop. So even well-intentioned, intelligent people don't necessarily know technologically where data resides. So I think you need to have a professional that knows how to do it. I think casting the net more widely, so that a forensic image, even though you get a forensic image, you don't have to process the totality of the data. You can then go in and utilize kind of tried and true methodologies like triaging and data extraction, inclusion list, exclusion list, to get down to the heart of the matter and the things that really are germane to the case at hand. And I think if you do that, it makes more sense. So the toolkit they're using, things that are proven in the industry, what we consider state-of-the-art techniques. I mentioned some of the companies previously that provide those tools, and then utilizing people that do this day in and day out. And IT people are plenty smart. I mean, what they do for a living is fine, but a lot of them don't have forensic backgrounds, and it's a little different ilk. And it's not bad or good, it just is what it is. And if we deal with those people and help them understand how to use the tools or assist them in that process, or just take over the steering wheel and actually drive the process, that's what I find the most successful.
So, Steve, any final thoughts to share with us?
Yeah, I think about my dad used to say the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we see a lot of different data sources nowadays, things that I didn't even comprehend, like interactive collaboration sites that people are using and brand new platforms for messaging that transcend individual devices, and things that are hidden in the background, and transient data that disappears. I mean, so many things are new, but at the same time, the approach that we utilize remains the same. It's really systematic and scientific in terms of identifying who the players are. Where could relevant data reside? Is it redundant? Are we using the right toolkit? Are we minimizing the amount of data that we collect and process and move forward to the practitioners that have to look at it? And if you kind of check those boxes off, I think you're doing the right thing. I think people that over collect and over process are really kind of the black pebble of our industry when we do things like that. So we want to be very mindful to budgets, to clients' time, and to the end goal that we're working towards.
Right. Thank you, Steve. And I will add, regarding any collections, whether it's remote or on site, trust your experts, call on your experts, get your expert to provide advice to you, consult with them, and get their advice. They're going to be very helpful to what you're doing and for you to have a successful data collection. So, Steve, I want to thank you very much for joining the Masters Tips and Tricks today. I really appreciate you sharing your advice and sharing your wisdom.
Good deal, Kevin. Always good to be with you.
Excellent. Hey, take care.